welcome all the participants for having taking time out from their busy schedule during this COVID-19 situation to be part of this virtual class series on the topic of diagnostic approach to COVID-19 and the present perspective. A brief introduction about our company. Dr. Renu, next slide.
Yeah.
With close to about 2 decades in the business, a leader of content and learning technology. Our technology powers more than 200 medical publishers and millions of users around the world. We have 700 plus employee in a company with a very experienced executive team. Next slide, Dr. Renu. We share deep domain expertise in our medical content. Because of our association with them, we offer the technology services to them. Most of you will relate with the names of Elsevier and Walter Kluwer's and Pearson because of your association with the healthcare industry. And also, we are proud to be collaborating with the American Heart Association, Ladle, and Royal College of Institution from UK. About IPC Health is an online learning and development platform which is specifically designed for the hospital in India, which basically provides a comprehensive learning management system for the faster onboarding of their staff with the induction training module available and the quality compliance training available on NABH. We have broken NABH model into small e-learning modules of 20 minutes to 30 minutes each. We also have the features of the content upload where the hospital management can upload their own content to deliver the training to their staff for better delivery of the content to the users. In the less than 3 months from today, we'll be having the certification program for nurses from the prestigious Royal College of Nursing Institution for the Indian audience for the consumption. By the end of this year, we'll also be having ACLS BLS certification program through the AHA on our platform. Next slide. We have seen the early success since our launch. We have just launched ourselves in the beginning of this year. I'm sorry, my video was off. And in the less than 6 months from our launch, we are close to 100 hospital and 18,000 users on a platform from all this hospital names which you are seeing on your screen. Our goal is to reach to 2,500 hospitals in the next 2 to 3 years with the vision of improving healthcare outcome in India by spreading knowledge through technology. With these words, I will not take more time. I will hand over to Dr. Renu to introduce our panelists and take this virtual session forward. Dr. Renu.
Thank you, Varun. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to IPC Health virtual class. I'm Dr. Renu Rawat, Head of Content Strategy, and I'll be moderating this session. I think so far we have 89 participants, and I think more and more people will be joining, but in the interest of time, I think we should start our session. Now, as you all know that the number of people infected with COVID-19 continues to rise globally, and this is causing tremendous stress on our healthcare systems. Though several trials are underway for the vaccines and potential therapies, but currently there is no cure. So in the absence of either a proven effective therapy or a vaccine, diagnostic testing becomes a very, very valuable tool. When we say diagnostic testing, it means your testing, not only your screening, not only your diagnosis, but also the management and as well as the surveillance, like contact tracing, deciding on the containment zones and other epidemiological surveillance activities. So when we talk about diagnostic testing, it's not just, making a diagnosis of COVID positive or COVID negative. It is more about it encompasses the entire ecosystem of surveillance, of diagnosis, of management, of quarantine. So in this session, our eminent speakers will talk about the basic diagnostic approach for COVID-19 with focus on understanding the indications for testing, how to take a sample, how to handle a sample, how to package it, and how to transport it. And also they'll be touching upon biosafety guidelines. So let me introduce you to our two speakers. Dr. Nand Kishore Alwa. He is a professor of pathology and head of the Division of Immunohematology and Transfusion Services at the prestigious MS Ramaiah Medical College, Bangalore. Dr. Alva has also served as an honorary secretary to Karnataka chapter of Indian Association of Pathologists and Microbiologists for a period of 6 years. Dr. Alva will be talking about the pre-analytical aspects of diagnostic testing, of sample collection, handling, doing and undoing of PPE, and biosafety guidelines. Our second speaker, Dr. Mahendra Ballar, is the founder and medical director at Pajna Institute of Yoga and Allied Science, PIAS, that is located in Bangalore. Dr. Ballar is a consultant pathologist and a hematologist, and he also runs his own diagnostic center, Maitri Diagnostics. He is actively involved in promotion and research activities in the field of yoga, naturopathy, and stress management. And Dr. Ballar will be talking about the technicalities of sample collections and about PCR and about antigen and antibody testing. Now, before we move to the session, I would want to tell you that the audience will be on listen-only mode. So during the session, if you want to put some question, you can go to the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and you can type your questions there. And we will take the questions at the end after both the sessions are over. So I now welcome Dr. Alva. Over to you, Dr. Alva.
Thank you, Renu, for that introduction. At the outset, I would like to thank IPC Health for giving this opportunity of having this platform for sharing our little experience, whatever we have accumulated during the past 2 to 3 months, that how COVID-19 patients should be handled in the diagnostic setup, and what kind of precautions you have to take, and what kind of diagnostic test you need to do on these patients who come with suspected COVID-19 infection. Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to show you the, can I have the previous slide, please? Yeah. What is the present scenario of COVID-19? That is as on yesterday, 24th June 2020. Of course, we are at the alarming side of world having confirmed cases of 91 lakh plus with deaths of 1,86,000. In our country, confirmed cases happen to be 1,86,000 plus and deaths happen to be 14,000 plus. In fact, an alarming situation that all of us are in, and possibly the community spread is going on, and we need to be more alert and we need to be more focused on the patients who are actually suffering from COVID-19. Let's have the next slide. COVID-19 patients actually comes just like any flu patient. In fact, just fever, cough, throat pain, and weakness. This is what the general complaint, what we generally see in the patients of COVID-19. And they can present with body ache, muscle ache, and difficulty in breathing, and also loss of smell and loss of taste. So this is how these patients present clinically, and high degree of clinical suspicion is very important to diagnose these patients early so that the tests are being conducted on these patients and these patients are being isolated and they're given proper treatment. WHO has defined two kinds, that is, one is ILI, that is influenza-like illness, and another is SARI, that is severe acute respiratory illness. The influenza-like illness, what WHO says is it is an acute respiratory infection with just fever more than 38 degrees centigrade, and patient present with cough, maybe body ache, throat pain, and simple respiratory infection, just like any other fever case or a cough case or a viral infection comes in. And this, they have classified it as influenza-like illness. Severe acute respiratory illness called SARI is defined as one respiratory infection with same fever, cough, and patient has presented with respiratory difficulty, in which case he requires hospitalization. Possibly he requires oxygen support, possibly he requires an ventilatory support. All these patients come under what is called a severe acute respiratory illness. We call them as SARI. And these patients are the one who require hospitalization. Let us see which patients has to go for testing. The next slide. ICMR has put up certain strategies in which COVID-19 testing can be conducted in India. And what I'm showing is the latest version, version 5, dated 18th May 2020. And what cases can go for testing? All symptomatic, that is ILI symptoms, individuals with history of international travel for the last 14 days can go for testing. All symptomatic or ILI symptoms contacts with laboratory confirmed cases. All symptomatic ILI symptoms healthcare workers or frontline workers involved in containment and mitigation of COVID-19, and all patients of severe acute respiratory infection, that is SARI. Then asymptomatic direct and high risk contacts of the confirmed cases to be tested on day 5 and day 10 on coming into contact. Also, ICMR says all symptomatic ILI with hotspots from the containment zones, and all hospitalized patients who develop ILI symptoms, and all symptomatic ILI among returnees and migrants within 7 days of illness should be tested for COVID. And remember, no emergency procedures, including deliveries, should be delayed for the lack of testing. However, the sample can be sent for testing if indicated as above of any of these 1 to 8 categories simultaneously. Let us move into how the sample should be collected when there is a suspected patient of COVID. And these are the materials that are used. We have viral transport media, that is VTM, we call it as VTM, plastic shaft swabs that are called as sterile swabs, that's flock swabs, tongue depressor, face masks which are N95, aprons disposable, gloves, disposable nitrite gloves, hand sanitizers, post discard bags with appropriate biohazard guidelines, cool box thermocol for transport, gel packs, head caps disposable, and goggles which are reusable, laboratory goggles, and brown tape, that is for the sealing of the sample, surgical spirit, and cryo-label sample for labeling purposes. Sample collection, whenever we do, this is one of the very important media in which the collected swabs are sent to the laboratory. The sample collection is done in VTM, that is viral transport media. And we get in the market ready to use VTM, and they should be used within their expiry period. And please check whether there is any turbidity or any growth in this VTM. If there is any turbidity or if the growth is found, you have to discard the entire batch of this VTM. And cotton-tipped calcium gennate swabs should be used, whereas these wooden shafts are not recommended for sample collection. How to prepare the patient? The nasal swab or the throat swabs are the one which are being used as per Government of India guidelines. In fact, currently, the PCR testing or polymerase chain reaction testing, the real-time PCR testing, is widely used as the test for identifying these patients of COVID. And this sample collection area should be clean and dry, of course, and should be properly disinfected with the disinfectants, and ensure that patient is seated in a proper, comfortable position. Please understand, it is very important that you take the complete confidence of the patient while collecting the sample, because This is a process in which the sample is being collected from the throat or from the nasopharynx, which can create a lot of gagging reflexes, and patient can cough vigorously, which is not good for the patient also, for the surrounding people also, and for the health worker also. So it is important that you take a complete confidence of the patient and explain him the procedure, what you're going to do and where you're going to introduce and how much time you'll be inside the mouth or inside the nasal cavity. All this explanation should be given to the patient so that a proper sample collection is done. Wear appropriate personal protections. We call it as PPE. Okay, the gloves, aprons, N95 caps, goggles before starting this procedure, and label the specimen collection vial, that is the VTM, with the unique participant's code. In fact, today when we are sending any sample to any laboratory, we need to log into their website and get a complete details of what details of the patients are required, and we can just get into the website and fill all the required necessities in the requisition form, and we get what is called as unique sample ID. This unique sample ID must be labeled on the vial, that is the VTM vial, in which we are going to collect and put the specimen and transport the specimen. And specimen should be collected under good illumination and at a proper place where there is a good ventilation. Well, nowadays we use what is called as sample collection coils. This is the one which we use in Ramaiah now. This coils we have prepared exclusively to see and to maintain a proper distance between the patient and the health worker. And there is a proper barrier between the health worker and the patient. This coils, where inside the coils, the health worker will be there with completely worn all the necessary precautionary PPEs, and patient will sit in that chair which is kept in front of him. And we have the long gloves there in which the health worker puts his hand and he can approach the patient's throat or the nasal cavity to collect the specimens. This sample, I can have the video please over there. The sample collection coils, whenever we use in the hospital setups, the sample should be collected and it should be, we have the materials there and we have the collection boxes where the sample has to be kept. And between every patient, and this kind of exercise is definitely important, wherein the gloves that has been used is sanitized first with the hand in place there, and the entire area where the patient is sitting and where the patient has moved should be sanitized again before you catch on with the next patient. So this collection coils is commonly used nowadays in the hospital setup. Suppose if this is not available, obviously we are approaching the patient and taking the complete confidence of the patient with the complete PPE in place. The health worker can collect the samples. Can go for the next slide. These are certain materials which are used for sample collection. On extreme left, you are seeing two of these swabs which are used for nasal as well as oral collection, swab collection. And next you have a pink media, a tube, which is nothing but a viral transport media, VTM. And you have a material or a plastic material in which this VTM will get inside. And with this Ziploc cover, the entire thing will get into the second Ziploc cover here. And this second Ziploc cover will get into the container. And this container, which is again labeled, is kept in the ice box or in the thermocol box and sent to the laboratory. Can I have the next slide? Next slide, please. Yeah. This is how the donning of PPE is done. There are specific steps of donning, how the donning has to be done. First, you need to inspect the PPE, that is the protective equipments, perform the hand hygiene first, put on the shoes cover first, and then put on the inner gloves. And next you have the steps like here. put on the gown. Can I have the previous slide, please? Yeah. From this, you will put on the N95 masks and then the goggle, then put on the outer apron. Then you need to wear the surgical hood. Then you have to wear the outer gloves and then completely verify whether you have donned completely. So in the hospital setup where we have the facility for COVID patients, we have a separate area for donning, we have a separate area for doffing. So on donning area, you take up these PPEs and inspect before wearing and verify after you completely wear the PPEs. Then only you should be able to approach the patient for any sample collection. Because sample collection can be highly contagious and patient is going to cough, going to gag, and there is every chance that there is a spread of viruses in the area and you need to take complete precaution with PPE while you collect the samples. Well, from this, we shall go for the sample collection. There are two types of swabs which you need to collect for PCLs. One is the throat or the oropharyngeal swab, and the second one is the nasopharyngeal swab, or the swab which is collected from the nasopharynx. So how to collect the first swab? In fact, it is very important that you collect the swabs from both the areas. This will increase the chances of getting the positivity, and false negative reports or false negative testing can be avoided by using this kind of throat oropharyngeal swab as well as nasopharyngeal swabs. We need to gently tilt the patient's, can I go for the previous? Yeah, previous slide please. Slightly tilt the patient's head back, and you need to study the chin and just ask the patient to open his mouth, his or her mouth, and use disposable tongue depressor to hold the tongue very well and insert this sterile swab. And once you enter with the sterile swab, you have to collect the sterile swab out or take it out after doing a rotatory movement within the oropharynx, and then it is get into the viral transport media. I'm going to have a demonstration of this little later on. And for throat or oropharyngeal swab, this is the procedure how it has to be done for nasopharyngeal swab. Sorry for the slide. Gently tilt the patient head backwards with around 70 degrees, and you need to insert the swab into the nostrils exactly parallel to the palate until a resistance is met at the turbinate so that you reach the nasopharynx firmly. Hold this swab in this position for a few seconds and then withdraw slowly with a firm rotating motion. So 5 times on clockwise and 5 times on anti-clockwise. You need to do this rotatory movements within the nasopharynx while you are drawing, and slowly take the swab outside and put the same swab into the another nostrils, and specimen should be collected from both the nostrils from using the same swab. Let us see how this kind of swab collection is done. Can I go for the next slide? This is the sample collection procedure, which I'm showing you. This have which will be used for PCR testing. Well, these are certain materials which are needed for collection of the samples. And the pressure. These are the two swabs. One is thin one and another is little thicker. The thin one is used for nasopharyngeal swab collection, and the thicker one is used for oropharyngeal swab collection. And around 2 to 3 centimeters away from the tip, you have a small marking in both of these swabs. This is the viral transport media. We call it as VTM, and which is tightly screw capped. And this is the cover in which the VTM shall go. And once it is covered, again it will go into the second cover and finally into third container where transport of this VTM shall happen. Let us start with the procedure of oropharyngeal swab. This is the mannequin, and this is how the patient probably will come to you. And you need to keep an extension of patient's neck at 70 degrees. And
procedure to the patient so that patient becomes comfortable with the procedure. Perform the chin and use the tongue depressor and slightly depress the tongue using the swab, which is used for oropharyngeal swab collection. Get inside the mouth and take swabs or smears from both the tonsils. And once this is completed, get into the oropharyngeal area and you can just take the swab from the oropharyngeal area by doing rotatory motion. And after collecting the swab, after the patient gets a gag reflex, you can slowly remove the swab outside and the tongue depressor. And this swab is put inside the viral transport media, and the tip of this swab has got a marking where it is cut using a scissor, and this cut tip is put inside the viral transport media. This media should be pre-labeled with the patient details and the identity of the patient or identity number. Well, take the other swab, which is used for the nasopharyngeal swab collection. Take the same position, keep the extension of the neck at around 70 degrees, and the swab is inserted into the nostril, one of the nostril, in a direction parallel to the palate, and get inside the nostril till you get the resistance as you reach the nasopharynx. Rotate the swab 5 times clockwise and 5 times anti-clockwise, and then slowly remove the swab. With the same swab, you insert into the other nostril and get into the nasopharynx parallel to the palate till you get a resistance. So hence now you have reached the nasopharynx, and now again rotate the swab 5 times on clockwise and 5 times anti-clockwise, and slowly remove the swab. This is how you are supposed to collect the swab, and then again this is put inside the viral transport media, and the tip of the swab is cut into the viral transport media, and you will have 2 swabs in the viral transport media now. One is from the oropharynx and one is from the nasopharynx. Collecting swab from nasopharynx is very, very important because that is the area where you get highest concentration of viruses. And this viral transport media is put inside the first cover, Ziploc cover, and it is closed like this. And this cover is put into the second cover like this. It is ziplocked and it is closed like this. And the second cover is put into the transport box completely inside like this. Okay, and it is closed. And this box is put into the ice box or thermocol box, where it is packed with the ice, so that the ice doesn't come in direct contact with the viral transport. The whole thing is transported as early as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Renu. And we will continue the process. So once the sample is collected, you have the unique specimen ID that is written or pasted on the each VTM, that is viral transport media. And this ID should be cross-checked again, and the details are filled in the sample collection form. And it has to be transported immediately to the laboratory. Once you complete the process as health workers, this is another next step, what you are supposed to do, that is doffing of the PPE. So it has got a specific protocol how we are supposed to doff on, and this will start with the disinfectant of disinfecting the outer gloves, remove the surgical hood, and then get into the process of disinfecting the outer gloves again, remove the shoe cover, and remove and disinfect outer gloves, and inspect and disinfect out inner gloves, and then remove the outer apron. Then you need to disinfect the inner gloves again and remove the gown and disinfect the inner gloves and remove the goggles, disinfect the inner glove. Then you are going to remove the N95 mask and then disinfect the inner glove again, and then disinfect your shoes, disinfect inner gloves and then remove it, and then you perform the hand hygiene, exit the doffing area. So this is how exactly the doffing of the PPE is done. You need to go through each and every step very critically, because every step is important. You are not supposed to miss out any step when the doffing is done, because you are finally dealing with the PPEs which are possibly infected. Sample handling and storing. The VTM containing the sample has to be kept in the cool box immediately after collection. And if for any reason we are not able to transport the specimen to the laboratory in a specified time frame, and it should be stored at or below -70 degrees. Repeated freezing and thawing should be avoided. It may interfere with the viral isolation later. You have the sample transporting. The sample should be transported at 2 to 8 degrees with specified time frame to the testing laboratory, and the sample should be kept in a proper standing position in appropriate test tube rack. And the VTM containing the tube should not be in direct contact with the frozen gel packs, so that we have the outer packing, and from there you have the frozen gel packs that are kept and should be transported to the laboratory as early as possible. Well, we have certain biosafety guidelines which we need to follow as healthcare professionals. We may get exposed to these patients, and it's very important that biosafety guidelines are followed in a 100% way, so that when you handle laboratory waste from the testing or suspected or confirmed COVID-19 patients, specimens are biohazardous for the laboratory, and they should be treated as biohazard in laboratory. Decontaminate the workspaces and the equipment with the appropriate disinfectants using EPA-approved disinfectants. And currently, actually, there is no evidence to suggest that laboratory waste need any additional packing or any additional disinfectant procedures. So every sample should be considered as infective, and as we use it for any other samples, we need to have the biosafety guidelines. The procedures for the with a highly likelihood of generating aerosols or droplets, for example, FNACs, for example, frozen sections or immunofluorescence techniques, they should be done using either certified class 2 biological safety cabinets or BSCs. The activity-specific biosafety risk assessment should be performed very regularly in the laboratory, because this is one of the very mandatory as far as enable accreditation is concerned. Viral isolation should be conducted in biosafety level 3 laboratory using BSL 3 practices. Biomedical waste generation, which is generated, it should be done as per waste management protocols that is used in your hospitals or in health centers. You have color-coded bins, for example, yellow for infected waste, black for general waste, etc. You have these color-coded bins, and your biomedical waste shall go according to the protocol what you have in the hospital into the color-coded bins with the color-coded covers. Well, in conclusion, use of personal protective equipment, so this PPEs, is very important when you handle the patients of COVID. It's very important that you protect yourself and protect your patient. You know, you are handling with a highly infective patient, and at the same time, there is no necessity to become panicky about it. Nothing to worry, provided you take proper personal protective equipmentation on you. It is important that you protect yourself, your family, and once you go back home, ensure that you keep your clothes separately and take bath before you come in contact with your family members. And of course, you are protecting your patients by yourself wearing PPE, so that the other patient's infection is not transferred to the suspected another patient. So I conclude my talk like this with the further application of PCR and other tests that are conducted for COVID-19 by Dr. Mahinder. And I acknowledge Ramaya Advanced Learning Center and my parent institute, Ramaya Medical College, Bangalore, for all the support that is given for this presentation. Thank you. Over to Renu.
Thanks, Dr. Alva, for a very informative session. Now I'd like to welcome Dr. Ballar, who will be talking about the analytical aspects of diagnostic testing. Over to you, Dr. Ballar.
Yeah. Yeah, healthy afternoon, everybody. I think Dr. Alva has fairly in detail covered the most important aspect of this whole COVID testing strategies. I mean, your test can be only as good as your sample. Renu, you can hand it over to me. I'll do this screen sharing.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so a good sample is a good test outcome. So the better the quality of the sample, better the quality of the test output. So now that we have seen in detail how the proper sample has to be collected, and the primary amongst them, yes, along with a good sample, is adequate care. Adequate care of yourself and adequate care of the patient from whom the sample is being collected. And once the sample is collected, the transportation and all that part is, of course, equally important. So like we all by now all know, coronavirus, it's labeled as the disease is known as COVID-19. It's an infectious disease caused by SARS-CoV-2 virus, first detected in December 2019 in Wuhan, China. And then later on, within a few weeks, it was declared as a pandemic, and which is still ongoing. And supposedly the first case which had similar symptoms were detected in 17th November 2019. I have some old statistics. I think Dr. Alva has spoken about the recent statistics. I'll skip over this. So symptoms again we have seen, but what we need to keep in mind is that once the exposure to the virus happens, it typically takes around 5 days for the symptoms to appear. From the exposure to a virus to the onset of symptoms, it is typically 5 days, but it could vary from 2 to 14 days. So that period of 5 days is the time when you have no symptoms, but you are still infected. And that's generally we call it the asymptomatic stage. We'll just see why that is important. Because there are different tests which can detect the virus in an early stage, and there are different tests which cannot detect anything in the first early stages. So now let's get straight into the COVID testing part. Basically for COVID-19, that is SARS-CoV-2 virus, there are basically 3 types of tests available to us as of now. One which we know as the molecular tests. The second category is the antigen test, and the third is the antibody test, the serological or the antibody test. Molecular test also called as nucleic acid amplification test because they directly deal with the DNA and the RNA, and that's the nucleic acid and amplification of that. That's why it's the molecular. Molecular is a very broad category under which nucleic acid amplification is one of the types of tests. So here there are these 3 types of tests. Molecular, that is nucleic acid amplification test. That is the test which detects the direct presence of the pathogen. So in this case, the virus, what we are talking about. Second category is the antigen test, where you don't actually detect the virus, but you detect a fragment of that pathogen, fragment of that virus, or some protein which is unique to that virus. So in this case, for example, in SARS-CoV-2, they use a spike protein which is present on the surface as a unique identifier of that particular virus. Third category of the test is the serological or the antibody test, where you are determining whether the individual has an exposure, and if he had an exposure, then he would have responded to it with an immunological way. So you are looking for an immunological evidence of exposure in terms of presence of antibodies. So these are 3 different categories of tests. One directly detecting the pathogen, one detecting a part of the pathogen or a protein of the pathogen, either of the content or of the surface. And third thing is the response of our body's response to that virus. So first we will talk about the most important test, that is the nucleic acid amplification test, popularly known as the NAT tests, or which we in routine terms know as the RT-PCR test. So what is a nucleic acid amplification test? Right now it's routinely used for the confirmation of COVID-19, and it is based on the detection of a unique sequence of the virus RNA, which is a part of that SARS-CoV-2 virus. Why do we call it real-time reverse transcription? Why we call it real-time RT-PCR? Because the process of polymerase chain reaction, we'll understand in the later slides what polymerase chain reaction means. There are two aspects to the polymerase chain reaction. One is there is a reverse transcription happening, and that's why it's RT. And we can monitor it on as it is happening, and that's why it's called a real time. So overall, the test is labeled as real-time reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction, that is RT-PCR. And it is nothing but the confirmation of the nucleic acid sequencing whenever it is necessary. So in this particular case, SARS-CoV-2 virus, there are 4 types of genes which we detect. That is RDRP genes, N gene, E gene, and the S genes. And later we'll understand what kits we are using in India, which genes they detect. So basically, RT-PCR is a gold standard frontline test for COVID-19 for detection of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. What does it involve? It involves the extraction of the DNA. In this case, the RNA, because SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus. So it involves the extraction of the RNA, which is the genetic material of the virus. And then detecting if this genetic sequence which you are trying to detect is the same sequence as of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, then that person is deemed to be positive. And this test can come negative if the actual sample doesn't carry the virus, which is the most common case, or if the sample was not collected properly or transported correctly or handled properly. Even in such cases, there could be some problem in the detection of the virus. So what does RT-PCR as a technology involve? It involves amplification of a single sequence of a complex mixture of DNA. Basically, it's a DNA replication in a test tube, right? And there is a continuous monitoring, and that's why we call it as a real-time PCR. In this whole principle, I will not go into too much of the technicalities, but what we need to just understand is that there are 3 steps in this whole process of PCR. One is called denaturation, second is the annealing part, and third is the extension part. So what happens in this particular viruses, because this is an RNA virus, actually the first step is the conversion of the RNA into a DNA. So once that conversion into DNA happens, then that thing is put in the into a tube, and there are a lot of other mixtures which go into it, and the denaturation of this DNA happens. So this double-stranded DNA gets broken into 2 single strands. That step is called denaturation, which happens at a little higher temperature. At high temperature, say about 90 degrees centigrade, this DNA divides into 2. The hydrophobic bonds of the DNA divides into 2. So it becomes 2 single-stranded nucleic acids. Second part is the annealing part. Annealing part is where a primer, a coded primer is added to this. And that goes, the 5' end goes and sits onto each strand of the RNA and starts replicating itself. That portion is called annealing, which happens at between 40 and 65 degrees centigrade, average of 55 degrees centigrade. And this process continues, and this is called the extension. And new DNA forms are created. So 1 leads to 2, 2 leads to 4. So it's an exponential growth. So let's say about 25 to 30 cycles, you have few billions of them. So it becomes easy to detect. So what was a 1 virus RNA can become billion copies in about few cycles. So the whole process can last about 90 to 120 seconds. And all this good thing is, right, all this process is now totally automated process. The most of the thermocyclers we have, or the PCR equipments we have, this whole process is automated. I mean, when the denaturation is happening, the temperature automatically goes to 90 odd, then the annealing step, it automatically comes down. Extension part, again, it goes back to 72 degrees. So it's all auto-controlled. We don't have to do anything manually. It's just as the sample preparation is done and is added to the tubes, and the relevant buffers and all that are added, and the whole process is automated. But these are the 3 basic steps involved in any PCR test for that matter. So why is PCR important to us? Because of the rapidity of the results. You can get results in few hours. And this is one technology which is amenable to automation. And it doesn't require radioisotopes. So there's no risk of radiation. And the analyte can be detected with very low levels of DNA or RNA. And it's a very, very high sensitive test. What are the downsides of this PCR testing? One is the high risk of contamination. If you don't take the adequate precautions while doing the test, like Dr. Alva was mentioning, that you have to use BS2 or a BS3 category safety cabinets to perform the test, or the extraction of the RNA and the DNA has to be done in those safety cabinets. So if you don't do it properly, there is a high risk of contamination. Then the chances of having false positive results and false negative results. We'll see what conditions you can get these two things. There are a lot of variations in this RT-PCR methodology, which is not important for us as part of the SARS-CoV-2, but for the sake of completion, I've listed them out. There's a reverse transcription, which we are talking about RT-PCR. There's an in situ PCR, single cell PCR, asymmetrical PCR, nested, immuno, anchored, competitive, varieties of them. So they are all for different purposes. So uses of PCR here for us, it is for the detection of SARS-CoV-2 virus. It's a technique basically that first uses the reverse transcription to convert RNA into DNA, like I said, single stranded, double stranded, and then uses PCR to amplify the DNA. Enough material, again, that which can be detected or analyzed. Simply put, it's a process creating double stranded molecule using initial reverse transcription reaction. What is it used for? In our case, it is used for detection of RNA viruses. The same can be used for molecular genetic analysis. And here there is an enzyme which is used actually for that annealing process, which is called as the Taq polymerase. That is the Thermophilus aquaticus polymerase, which is the most ideal because that works best at very high temperatures. Like we were speaking earlier, annealing needs about 90 degrees centigrade. So the Taq polymerase is the enzyme which actually helps in that annealing portion. So for COVID-19, like I said, biosafety cabinet, at least a BSL-2 grade or equivalent facility has to be there. Prior to the RNA extraction step, no heating has to be done because that denatures the RNA extraction, so that should never be done. And a positive NAT result, in this case, the RT-PCR result which should have at least 2 different targets of COVID-19 virus genome. In India, what we are using generally is that we are detecting 2 targets, the RDRP and the E genes. There are some kits available and very few centers are using which are detecting 3 viral genomes, the RDRP, E and N genes also. But most of them are using 2 genes, the RDRP and the 2 genes. 2 is the minimum requirement, 2 different targets of the COVID-19 virus gene, of which at least 1 should be very, very specific to COVID-19. The other one may be general to all SARS category of viruses. So what does a positive test, like we have done an RT-PCR test, we have got a positive result. So what does that mean? It means that RNA of a SARS-CoV-2 virus was detected in that sample, right? Second, once that happens, then the patient is presumptively infected with the virus and he is presumed to be contagious. That means he is in the active stage. So a positive result indicates 3 things to us. One is that the RNA was detected in that sample or the patient sample, and he is infected with the virus, and he can infect other people. When he is contagious, that means he can infect other people. The few very, very important things which we need to know here, all the laboratory test results of any positive or negative should always be considered in the context of clinical observations, which is a very, very important part of the interpretation of these tests, and the epidemiological data in making a final diagnosis, because any diagnosis which you do will have a bearing on patient management decisions. In this case, it could be from isolation to giving him treatment for 14 to 21 days and a lot of such things. So we have to be very sure of that. And all laboratories who are doing this test must follow the standard confirmatory testing reporting guidelines appropriate to the public health authorities of that country. For us, ICMR is giving out those strategies, and they are not really changing, they are upgrading the strategies on a very frequent basis. And we have to be aware of what our present guidelines are and follow them. And we should always use approved RT-PCR diagnostic panel kits. In our case, at least, which are detecting 2 viral genomes, RDRP, E or the E gene. And all this is done so that the likelihood of false positives and false negatives can be drastically reduced. So when you have a wrong outcome by wrong outcome, I mean when the patient is having a virus and you've still got a negative result, or the patient doesn't have a virus and you've got a positive result. So when is the possibility of such a thing happening? One, and the most important part, like I told you earlier, our test is as good as the quality of the sample. So poor quality of the sample containing very little patient material, if it is not taken from the right area in the right manner, like he said, 5 times clockwise, 5 times anti-clockwise, if you have just put it inside and taken it out, it might not get the right sample. That's a poor quality of the sample, and that can lead to false negative results. And either the specimen was collected very late or very early in the infection. Like I told you, from the onset of from the exposure to the onset of the symptoms, it's typically 5 days, and the virus starts appearing within 2 days, starts showing up within 2 days. So if it is done a little ahead of that, I mean the day of the exposure itself, it might show negative, or it is done too late after that, maybe after 20 days or 25 days, if it is that, still it can show negative. Or if the specimen was not handled and shipped appropriately. All the transport and the shipping guidelines very, very effectively explained by Dr. Alva, which is there as part of the presentation. They have to be very strictly followed. And some technical reasons are a possibility which are inherent to the test. For example, there could be some viral mutations which could not be detected in those particular tests. Or there could be some PCR inhibitory factors which are present within the sample itself or within the test methodology. So there are a lot of factors which can inhibit the PCRs. For example, presence of some salts, sodium or potassium and stuff like that. They can inhibit the PCR process. In such time also, you may not be able to detect the viral gene. Why should we be bothered of a false positive or a false negative result? Because whatever result you give has a lot of implications to it in the terms of patient management decisions. So that's why in case we have given a false positive result, based on that result, the patient may be recommended for isolation. There may be a very limited contact with friends and families, and he might increase his chances of contacting other COVID patients because he might be transferred to a COVID ward. And if he was negative and reported falsely positive, he might in fact get exposed to COVID-19 patients. And it might initiate a lot of monitoring of the family, like we are talking about contact tracing, primary and secondary contacts. So that might initiate a lot of monitoring of the family and close contacts. It might limit his ability to work, and delay the diagnosis and treatment of the actual infection which was there. And also he might be liable to be prescribed for unnecessary medications or treatments or therapies. And there's many other unintended adverse effects. And that's why a false positive result has to be taken with a great caution. False negative results, again the same thing. If you have false negative result we have given, I mean the patient is positive and it is shown as negative, it might delay or prevent administration of supportive treatment which the patient would need. It might delay the monitoring of the infected individuals because he is negative, so he'll go around all the town and infect a lot of other people. And other unintended adverse events can come out of the false negative results. So that here we conclude the antigen, the nucleic acid or the RT-PCR test. So basically it's a gold standard test, which is right now used for most of the confirmation of COVID-19 diagnosis. The next type of tests available to us are the antigen tests. Like I said earlier, we are trying to detect a part of the protein or a fragment of that virus. So this is a diagnosis, but the only advantage is that it is a very quick test, which detects the fragments of proteins found on or within the virus. By testing the samples collected, again the samples collected here are using swabs only. And they look for antigen proteins from the viral surface. In the case of coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2, which we have right now, they're usually the proteins from the surface spikes. But one of the challenges in the antigen test is to find a target which is unique to SARS-CoV-2. But right now, presently, one of the kits has got approved last week in India, antigen test, which is a fairly good test. It has got a specificity of about 84%, which is quite decent. And it is being used for rapid testing in a lot of centers, I think, which will be very soon widely available all around India. Right now, it's being done in few centers, especially Delhi and few other high case centers. The whole point about antigen test is it is very quick. It can provide results within minutes. But the flip side is that they may not detect all active infections because based on the mechanism of their action or the test methodology. So though the antigen tests provide results in minute, we have to be aware of certain pitfalls which should be taken into mind when we are doing an antigen test. That means they may not detect all active infections based on the mechanism of their action. And these tests are very, very specific for the virus, but they are not as sensitive as the RT-PCR test. Therefore, a positive result with an antigen test is a high accuracy, but a negative test doesn't necessarily rule out COVID-19 infection. And there is a higher chance of false negatives, so a negative result does not rule out infection and has to be taken with caution. But still, it's a great test because you can cover much more people during such pandemic times. And it's a simple, doesn't require too much of technology, and not too much of technical training is also required. And it can be done as a POC, which we call as a point of care test. The third category of tests available to us is the serological or the antibody test, which we have heard about on and off during this last 2 months. So what does the test do? It's based on the lateral immunochromatographic assay, LIA, lateral flow test, where if there is a presence of an antibody to that particular antigen, it is detected in the form of a color change on a paper strip, which is embedded into a cassette. What are the other methods available for antibody detection? The very popular ELISA method, that is enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay. Second is the CLIA method, that is chemiluminescent immunoassay method. The third is the fluorescent immunoassay method. So these are other methods available for detection of any antibody, and this also. Right now in India, we have no rapid card test approved. There were 3 kits which were approved, but because of bad results or bad performance, they were all recalled back. Right now, about a week or 10 days back, they have approved one ELISA kit, which is being manufactured by 3 different companies in India, Zydus and Euroimmune and Transasia, which is being done, but that is only detecting IgG as of now. There is no ELISA kit for IgM as of now approved in India. So what is this IgM and IgG? Let's understand. There are 2 different types of antibodies specifically here, which we try and detect. The first type of antibody to be detected after a pathogen has entered the body is the immunoglobulin M. Second, after that follows the immunoglobulin G, which generally develops after IgM and may remain detectable for a few months or years also. That's an antibody which gives you long-term protection from a particular infection. So these are the types of antibodies that are often targeted in the serological tests. One thing which you have to understand about this antibody test, that they can only show up between 9 to 28 days after the infection has set in. So if you do a test prior to that, it might show negative, but that doesn't rule out an infection. So whenever possible, laboratories should rely on molecular tests like the RT-PCR test, which we spoke of for diagnosis of SARS-CoV-2 infections. Results from the antibody testing should not be used as a sole basis to diagnose or exclude SARS-CoV-2 infections or to inform infection status. They are very good surveillance methods, very good for doing mass testing, but not good enough for diagnosis. So a positive result from a serological test for COVID-19, that means an individual has antibodies that likely resulted from an infection with SARS-CoV-2 or possibly related to some other coronaviruses. But now quite good tests are available, so they can be specific for SARS-CoV-2. Negative results, possibility of SARS-CoV-2 infections, it kind of cannot be 100% ruled out, but kind of says that the person may not have been exposed or it may not be in the incubation period. So what are the best use of a serological or antibody test? A properly validated serology test can be used as a part of zero-purpose prevalence studies, which can help us understand how many people have been infected, the infectivity rate, and how far the pandemic has progressed. I mean, like what now the numbers we are getting is mostly from the RT-PCR test. Probably if they do more wider serological tests, then more number of people would have already got infected, may have been asymptomatic or mild asymptomatic, not even have realized. But to get the true picture, if they do these kind of testing at a mass level, they can get to the actual numbers. So this is about all the 3 tests which are there as a part of this. Presently in India, RT-PCR is the gold standard. Antigen kits has been approved, which has been doing, and it's got a decent sensitivity. Antibody test, only IgG antibody test has been approved for by ICMR. As of now, there's no IgM antibody test approved as of now, as I'm speaking to you. There's one small concept which you have to understand about all this. It's called EUA. It's called Emergency Use Authorization. So the United States FDA, that's the Food and Drug Administration, has made most of these COVID tests available or given authorization for the use under an emergency access mechanism, which is called EUA. That's an emergency use authorization. What does that mean? That means to say that there are not 100% wide, that normally what is done for an IVD or in vitro diagnostics, that kind of evaluation has not been done, but a decent evaluation done. But in justifying this emergency circumstances, the use has been given, but as an emergency use only for the diagnosis or detection of COVID-19. So an IVD, that is an in vitro diagnostics, is made available under an EUA, has not undergone the same type of review as a normal FDA approved or cleared IVD. So FDA may issue an EUA under certain criteria are met, which includes, and that there are no other adequate approved available alternatives are based on the totality of the scientific evidence. So it's reasonable to believe that this IVD is effective in the detection of the virus that causes the IVD. But one small thing, Claimari has that any test which has been approved under EUA can be used only during the times of this pandemics. Once the pandemics is declared closed, that kits or those drugs can no longer be used for that specific diagnosis. So it's an effect for during the duration of the COVID-19 declaration justifying as an emergency use, unless terminated or revoked, after which the test may no longer be used. So presently, whatever we have, all available tests are under an agreement of EUA. So in short, here I will just sum up. There are three things about any test: how accurate it is, how fast you can do it, and whether the technology, how robust the technology is needed, or whether the technical availability is there or not. So if you term in terms of speed, antibody and antigen tests come very high. They are okay in accuracy. They need very, very low tech to be done. They can be finished in 15 minutes maximum. I'm telling that's for an antigen test. Antibody test can be done much faster. They are excellent for a decentralized process or POC like point of care tests. Then they target antibodies and antigens. PCR kits need a little higher technology and the accuracy is much higher. They typically take about 90 to 120 minutes and they need some special equipments like a thermocycler. They need an RNA extractor devices, but they are very good for pre and asymptomatic infections because it directly targets the genes. So this in short sums up the whole thing. Okay, once you got an exposure, within 5 days, the clinical symptoms start appearing. Once the clinical symptoms start appearing, your CRP can go high, but that's a separate thing. IgM starts increasing from the 3rd day onwards, generally stays up to 14 days. IgG starts appearing after 7 days and can remain for months or years together, right? Molecular tests can pick up a virus much before the clinical symptoms appear, probably on the 2nd day after your exposure. So that's the gold standard test which we are using right now. So what is the role of a testing strategy in this rapid pandemic management? So especially the role of rapid testing, not PCR testing, rapid testing. So rapid testing of those with symptoms, you can, if it comes positive, you can quarantine them. Once you quarantine them, you can do a contact tracing. Once you do a contact tracing, all the symptomatic people, you can take them for treatments, or you can monitor hotspots and do your resource allocation accordingly. And also to apply all those preventive measures like social distancing and maintaining personal hygiene and all that. So that's the rapid testing's role in the whole management of the pandemics. Great. So I think, Renu, that ends my thing here. And we are good to take any questions if there.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Villar. And now we'll move to questions from the audience. The first question is for Dr. Alva. What is the right time to collect a throat swab, Dr. Alva?
That's a very good question. See, throat swabs and nasopharyngeal swabs are generally collected, as Dr. Mahendra was telling. It is collected for PCR testing. Okay. So technically speaking, whenever the patient gets infected with the PCR, he is supposed to show viruses. But generally, at the end of day 2, you generally get these viruses in full strength. So it is important, or it is better that you take these swabs from day 2. And if you fall under the category of what is explained in ICMR guidelines, you can go for testing. It is not that everybody will go for testing without anything, but if you have got a symptom or if you have got a suspicion, and if your doctor feels that yes, this particular patient has to go for testing, based on the criteria that is laid down by ICMR, you can go for testing. Okay, so as Dr. Mahendra was telling, as far as antibody or antigen tests are concerned, when you talk about an antibody, especially IgM, starts developing only after day 7. So technically speaking, PCR is the best test and it is the gold standard. And this is the one which has to be done at an earlier stage. So as early as day 2, you can go for PCR testing using nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal swabs.
Okay, Dr. Alba. The next question is for Dr. Ballar. Dr. Ballar, can you tell in a little more detail what is the difference between a viral load of a COVID-19 asymptomatic and COVID-19 symptomatic patient?
See, most of the studies which have been done, people who have done any studies, there is generally no difference in the viral loads between asymptomatic and mild symptomatic. Technically, especially in coronavirus, which is little unusual. Whatever, there has been a study in Singapore, but they're all done in early May and late April and all that. But technically, as the symptoms starts appearing, that means the viral load starts increasing. But in this particular test, for RT-PCR test, for it to be minimum detectable, there has to be 400, about 100 viral bodies have to be present for them to be immediately detectable, which is not such a very huge load. So that's why we say within second day, it can start showing positive results.
Okay. The next question is for Dr. Alba. Dr. Alba, what are the clinical samples that are recommended for testing COVID-19?
As we all of us know, the symptoms, the basic symptoms which patient present with when they have got a COVID-19 infection is fever, throat pain, body ache, difficulty in breathing. Okay. Recently, they have added loss of smell and loss of taste. Okay. So these are the common clinical presentation when the patient present, and it is important that you approach your doctor. There is a fever clinic established in most of the hospitals now. You approach your doctor and with the basic clinical suspicion, probably he or she can advise the patient to go for COVID testing.
Okay. The next question is for Dr. Ballar. Dr. Ballar, what is the screening strategy, or what should be the screening strategy for COVID-19 for hospitals?
I think it has been covered as an ICMR strategy by Dr. Alva. Anyway, I'll just see, ICMR keeps updating their guidelines every now and then. The recent strategy is that anybody who is asymptomatic need not go for testing, unless there has been some family member or a primary contact which has been positive. That's a good enough reason for you to go. Or IL-like symptoms is good to go for testing. SARI-like symptoms, good to go for testing. Or you have come in contact with somebody who has tested positive in the next 48 hours, to go for testing. So this is the screening strategy presently used. Now, once a patient has become positive, then earlier, 14th day, they used to do a repeat test before a patient is concluded negative and discharged. But now recently, again, ICMR and the government of India has changed the strategy. Discharge negative testing is not required. Before discharge, if they are 3 days free of fever or any symptoms, they are deemed negative, but advised 7 days home quarantine or home isolation after that. So 3 plus 10 days minimum of not having any symptoms. So that's the discharge. They are on discharge right now. We are not advising negative results, except in cases which were severe and needed ICU care or ventilator care or on oxygen. In them, definitely proven negative by a repeat PCR is the criteria for discharge.
Okay. There are some more questions from the audience. So I'll now open the questions for both the speakers. So please, pick up a question and can answer.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Alva, should I read out the question, or you can also look at your Q&A and you can also start?
Please read out the question.
Okay, okay. So what are the challenges that you might, or I mean, a healthcare provider may come across while collecting the sample for children? So whatever we have discussed today is more from a adult perspective. Yeah, a little about children.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because it is very difficult to convince a child how this sample has to be collected and what is the procedure. And obviously, the children will be very irritative at the moment. Already, the child is having fever. Obviously, we have got a great challenge in that. But however, it has to be convinced that when a small child is there, when we are collecting the sample, the child has to be with the parent, obviously, and we should ensure that the healthcare professional who is collecting the sample has worn the PPE properly, and sample has to be collected, obviously, with a little difficulty. Of course, it is a challenge to collect from pediatric age group. In fact, the nasopharyngeal as well as oropharyngeal swabs also can be collected, not only the sitting position, it can be very well collected on the supine position as well. So the same methodology for nasopharyngeal as well as oropharyngeal is undertaken. The swabs are very thin ones. Generally, the swabs what we use for collections are very thin ones, and they will not cause much irritation unless we irritate the throat too much. So probably we can make the child to lay down in the supine position and collect the sample. Though it is a little challenging, we need to collect, because RT-PCR is the gold standard. I mean, we need to collect the samples from oropharynx and nasopharynx, and it has been proved beyond doubt that the viral load that is isolated will be maximum when you collect the sample from nasopharynx, and hence nasopharyngeal sample swab collection is a must when you are planning for an PCR testing.
Yeah, and if I may add, see, there are a few nurses who are specially trained for sample collection. See, sample collection of even a simple thing like blood is also a challenge in children. So there are a lot of, diversion techniques which the phlebotomists and all use, you know. So a better trained nurse can actually perform the job.
Okay. This is a very interesting question from one of the audience. It says that in Bangalore, there is a surge of cases with increased containment zones. So is it should all pregnant women be tested for COVID?
Not really necessary, unless they fall into one of those screening criteria as prescribed by the ICMR. If they are as a primary or a secondary contact in that category, or if they have any ILI or SARI-like symptoms.
Okay. Then there's one question regarding this oropharyngeal and nasopharyngeal sample, which you've already covered. Just since there is a question, I would want a little clarification on this. Is it a mandate that either a oropharyngeal, nasopharyngeal, or both samples are to be collected, or either one is also fine?
Either one is fine, but ideally both should be collected. Ideally, because the viral isolations, when we do it from both, false negative chances of getting under PCR is very, very, very minimal. So it is better that you collect from both. But if you ask me between these two, which one you select? It is nasopharyngeal.
Okay. Okay. Then another question is regarding the difference between antigen and serological testing. Like, is it important, like out of the two, which one should one prefer? NAT we know is mandatory, is a golden standard, but what about antigen and serological?
Yeah. Between these two, of course, see, the implications of both the tests are very different. But if it is for the diagnostic purpose, then antigen test is better than the antibody test. Antibody tests are not for diagnosis. They are used mainly for prevalence studies. How far the infection has already been, one. Second, whether you're already in the infective stage, that is the IgM stage, or the IgG, or the chronic infective stage. So to label a person that. So they've got two different implications, but if it is for diagnostic purpose, antigen test is much better than antibody.
In the interest of time, Dr. Ballar and Dr. Alva, I'll take two more questions. One is regarding, we know that number of confirmed cases also involve some false positive. So is there a review procedure in place that controls the false positive or keeps a tab that we don't have many false positives? Is there some kind of a review process in place as of now by ICMR?
False positives, generally if the sample is right and if the test methodology is as per the prescribed standards, then generally it's not very common to get false positive. But there have been cases where this has happened when today they have taken a sample and the patient didn't have any symptoms, and 1 or 2 for 24 or 48 hours later they did a repeat test and it came out as positive, negative. There is no defined strategy as such, but if there is a high degree of clinical suspicion or high degree of suspicion that it might not be positive, then recommended is that after 24 or 48 hours, you go for a repeat PCR test, RT-PCR test, which they have, as per few studies, come across in few cases where people had recovered with after 21 days of treatment, and after 1 month, they again had some mild thing and they went for a test and it showed positive again after becoming negative. So that this thing was kicking, probably there were some viral fragments, not viruses, but viral fragments which were there in the respiratory channels, which were picked up and showed positive.
And if I can add some more point on this, sometimes these viruses are prone for getting mutated. Okay, so sometimes the test can be negative or a positive test, a false positive, false negative. And over a period of time, if he gets the test positive to negative or negative to positive, probably this patient may be having a mutated viruses also. And viruses can mutate and can manifest in another way, and you can have the positive test later on. So that is how, if there is a negative, high degree of clinical suspicion is there, it is definitely important that this patient go for a repeat test, which has to be confirmed and which has to be determined by the clinician who is treating the patient.
Okay. The last question I would take, though there are many more, but I think I can take only one. That suppose there's a person who has come in contact with a suspected, like he suspects that he has come in contact with a COVID positive patient or a case. So when should he go to take a sample, or should he get a sample tested if he has no symptoms? He suspects that he's in contact with he has come in contact with a COVID patient, but he's asymptomatic.
Yeah,
so should he be going
he should.
for,
He should. He's a primary contact. Then then he comes under the category of a primary contact. And the primary contact is a criteria for screening strategy as per ICMR guidelines presently. So even if it doesn't have symptoms, he has to go for a test. If he is sure of that his contact being positive.
So thanks, Dr. Alva and Dr. Belar. I mean, on behalf of IPC Health, I would like to thank you for sharing your valuable experience and practical insights with us. And I'm sure that the audience would take these nuggets of information with them, and they will keep that in mind when they are managing a suspected COVID case or a patient with influenza-like illness. So
thank you, Renu and Team Impulses, for having given us this opportunity. And thanks to all the participants also. And I was constantly observing, continuously everyone was there throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Impulses and Renu, for this wonderful opportunity. Hope our participants have got enough information. Let us hope to meet again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks all our participants. Thank you.